we are live. All right, so I this is going to be tough. All right, the visual may be lagging behind what I'm saying, but I will post the video tomorrow, right? And that way you'll be able to see it while I'm talking about it, right? All right. So if Landon, if you can just keep track of how much lag we have here, right? So right now I'm showing it's 12:24. I don't know what my clock is showing for you. All right, so we're about a minute behind. All right, so I'm gonna talk about this, and you'll see it here in a second. All right, the author basically on the first page, I think it's the first page of the book. Well, page 11 of the book. The Joshua Tree Epiphany. He basically says he didn't know, he was never sure what a Joshua tree was, right? But once he found out, once he saw one Joshua tree, right, he started seeing them everywhere, right? And see, once he was conscious of the tree, once he could name it, he saw it everywhere. It's kind of like when you get you've never seen like a certain make or model of a car, and then you buy one, and then you see it everywhere you go, right? Anybody have that experience? I have. I know that all of a sudden you start noticing them. Oh, that looks just like my car. That's the same model, the different color, that kind of thing, right? I think most people have experienced that. Well, that's what he's talking about here, right? And the point of that is that there are, he's going to point out four basic concepts in graphic design that once you know about them, you will see them everywhere you go, right? And you go, oh, he's using poor use of proximity, or that's poor use of contrast, and that sort of thing, right? And he's right, because I used this book when I got my master's degree in electronic in instructional technology, right? This book was a book I used, right? And once I was introduced to these concepts, you go to the grocery store or something, and you see a sign that's using one of these principles in a poor way. You go, wow, that's really poor contrast, or that's really they could use proximity better, right? It's just one of those things where once you've been introduced to these concepts, you see them everywhere, right? So beware that I am about to do that for you or to you, right? So, and here we go. All right. All right, so once you can name something, you're conscious of it, right? And you have power over it, you own it, you're in control, right? So now we're going to learn the names of the several different design principles, right? Good design is easy as 1, 2, 3. You learn the principles, recognize when you're not using them, apply the principles. That's all you got to do. And look at the two different versions of this right here. How much lag do we have right now? About a minute. All right, so you should see it in a second. There's two versions of this one card, and one is much more has much greater impact than the other. Let's say, right? And we'll find out. We'll discuss this later on, but I think we'd all agree that the second one, the lower one, this one, is much more impactful than the top one, right? And why is that, right? And that's what we're going to talk about in this short little book. All right. So the four basic principles. All right. Contrast. The idea behind contrast is to avoid elements on the page that are merely similar. If the elements are not the same, then make them very different. Contrast is often the most important visual attraction on a page. It's what makes a reader look at the page in the first place. Repetition. Repeat visual elements of the design throughout the piece. You can repeat colors, shapes, textures, spatial relationships, line thicknesses, font size, graphics concepts, etc. This develops the organization and strengthens the unity. Alignment. Nothing should be placed on the page arbitrarily. Every element should have some visual connection with another element on the page. This creates a clean, sophisticated, fresh look. Proximity. Items relating to each other should be grouped close together. When several items are in close proximity to each other, they become one visual unit rather than several separate units. This helps organize information, reduces clutter, and gives the reader a clear structure. Right? So what you can see, these four ideas create a very memorable acronym, right? Anybody tell me what that is? What's the acronym there? CRAP. That's right. So you'll never forget CRAP, right? You can't forget CRAP. So that's the beauty of this, right? Contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. So you will forever, and I guarantee you remember, if you don't remember all the words, which you should, remember them now, right? You will remember that you would learn CRAP in this class, right? All right, so contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. CRAP. All right, so burn that into your brain right now. All right. So that's what the four things we're going to go over in this book. This book also goes into typeface and all that sort of thing. We're not going to go into fonts and all that, really. So the second part of this book, we're not even going to utilize, right? So these first 4 weeks, we're going to go through these four principles, and then we'll be done with this book. Because I just want to make sure that these principles are ones that you've been introduced to, because I will refer to them when you create UIs that break these principles. I will refer to them. All right. I want that to be clear. All right. Let's see. Good communication is as stimulating as black coffee and just as hard to sleep after. Right. So we're going to go through proximity today. I'm not going to read all this to you. Right. I'm going to kind of hit the highlights. I did read those last 4 paragraphs because they were that important. Right. But for whatever reason, he takes CRAP in opposite order, so it's more like park for some reason, right? But he starts with P and then works back to the C, right? So it's CRAP, yes, but with a C. What do you mean with a C? Park with a C. All right. Maybe you heard par without the C. Anyway, proximity, right? Proximity means the closeness or distance between things, right? I'm not sure what the lag is right now. Hopefully it's not too bad. Just let me know. 12:31, still a minute behind. That's not too bad. All right, so proximity is the closeness, how things are related in space, right? So I'm going to start putting things in our notes document, which is right some freaking where, right? Where is it? Too many balls in the air. Let's see. That's not it. There they are, I think. All right, so the important parts I'm going to copy into our notes, right? So I'll do this, right? So Robin's principle of proximity states that you group related items together, right? Move them physically close to each other so that the related items are seen as one cohesive group rather than a bunch of unrelated bits, right? If they're not related, then they shouldn't be close together like they are, right? So I mean, because people naturally, when they look at items on a page or on a screen, they will naturally draw conclusions about their relationships based on how they're placed, right? That's the concept of proximity on a page as in life. Physical closeness implies a relationship, right? When you go to a party and you see these three people over here close together and these four people over here close together, and you see little cliques in the party, you automatically assume, hey, well, they obviously they're close friends and they're sticking together, and there's different little cliques going on, and that closeness implies a relationship, right? So it's the same thing with visual elements on a page, right? All right, so if you look at this My Flowers, these two My Flowers things, right? What would you say? What would you assume, right? Those last four flowers seem, if you look on the right, the last four seems to be they're somehow different, right? So the carnation, primrose, violets, and pink, you assume they're different. For some reason, you may not know why, but you assume that they're set out for a reason, right? All right, take a look at this business card below. How many separate elements do you see in that small space? That is, how many times does your eye stop to look at something? Right? We have thorns. Yes. Do they? Oh, well, there's somebody who knows something about flowers. Okay. Very good. I did not realize that. Cool. All right, so if you look at this card, there's 5 things on it, right? Does your eye stop 5 times? Yep. Where do you begin reading? Probably in the middle, right? Because the phrase is the boldest. What do you read next? Left to right? Probably. What happens when you get to the bottom corner? Where does your eye go? Do you wander around making sure you didn't miss any corners? Right? What if I confuse the issue even further, right? Like this one. Now there's 2 bold things. Where do you go, right? It's not a very good design, right? Nothing seems to be related to anything else because they're not using proximity in a useful manner, right? All right. When several items are in close proximity to each other, they become one visual unit, right? Put that in the notes as well. Bump that up a little bit. Possible example, 12, 24, 48, and 60 are even numbers. Not sure. What's that relating to? They are even numbers. I'm not sure what that relates to. Anyway, so here he has reorganized these things, right? By grouping similar elements into one unit, several things instantly happen. Page becomes more organized. You understand where to begin reading the passage, and you know when you are finished. And the white space around the letters, automatically becomes more organized as well. So if you look at this, right, this looks much more cohesive than the other examples, right? I think you would agree with that. All right. So now there's no question as where you begin, right? You begin at the top, you read to the bottom. The address and phone number are grouped together as they should be. and the owner's name is directly under the business name, right? With that one simple concept, this card is now organized both intellectually and visually, right? It makes sense. All right. So most of this book is like different visual examples, as you would probably guess a graphic design book would be, right? So there's not a ton of reading. I would suggest reading this all. I'm not going to read it all to you, but we're going to look at these different examples and talk about them, right? Because what we will do next time is when you're going to find examples of proximity, and then we're going to discuss your examples, right? So we're going to look over them. All right. So here's a typical newsletter flag, sometimes called the masthead. Right? Many separate items. Does any information seem related to each other, judging from the placement? All right. So we got these two items up here, kind of hanging out. Then we got this volume number, and then we got a date down here, and then we got the name of it. Right. It seems kind of chaotic. Maybe not the best, overall, right? The two items top left are in close proximity to each other, implying a relationship. But should these have a relationship? Is it the society that's amusing and peculiar, or the Shakespeare papers, right? That's a good question, right? How about the volume number and the date? Usually they go together, right? They should be close together, right? The example below, the proper relationship has been established, right? Note that it's amusing, peculiar, educative is right below the Shakespeare papers. And Sweet Swan Society, volume 26, number 9, right? Is all together, right? This is a much cleaner and much more informative layout, right? Look at these two, right? Well, that's good. I'm glad you're starting to get it, right? And once I get through the chapter, we'll talk specifically about the assignment, right? When you create a flyer, a brochure, a newsletter, or whatever, you already know which pieces of information are logically connected, right? So what's the problem here, right? There is some contrast, right? But there's some contrast between these headlines, kind of thing, right? But there's no space between each subsection, right? Put some space in there and increase the contrast on that, which we're not talking contrast specifically, but just a little space between each section lets them breathe a little bit and gives them their connections between each other makes more sense, right? So here he says the same list that has been visually separated into groups. I'm sure you already do this automatically. I'm just suggesting that you now do it consciously and thus with more strength, right? Notice I added some contrast to the headlines and repeated that contrast. So he's already using the other elements, right? Because he can't not do that, right? But we're focusing on the proximity right here, and he's created that by putting space between the different elements. All right. And then we get this very boring little kind of flyer, and it all just seems to run together. This doesn't engage you to read it at all, right? You're like, you see this blank, this kind of blah representation of whatever it is they're trying to tell you, right? And I think you're not drawn to read it, right? It's visually boring. It's difficult to find the information, what is going on. Doesn't help that the information presented inconsistently, right? For instance, how many readings are in this series? You don't even know, right? But now, check this out, right? Now we've grouped them together and it makes much more sense, right? See how there's space between them. He's also used different fonts and contrast to help illustrate what he's trying to go for. but this is much cleaner and much better, right? And one more, he tweaks it one more time. Now you can see that there's space between Henry V and these two Henry IVs, implying a relationship between these two, which indeed they are, right? One's part one and one's part two, so this space implies that there's something different about this one, right? All right. Now look at this chaotic thing. What's the lag now? No, still only a minute. That's not too bad. All right. Anyway, this is a mess, right? It's a hot mess, as they say, right? I mean, I don't know what's going on here. There's literally, it's trying to be creative, but nobody's gonna. I mean, nobody knows what all that is, man. It's insane. I don't. I would hope nobody actually did that, but who knows? It says the intention was probably to create something fun and energetic, but at first glance, can you tell when and where the classes are happening? And when and where is like key. If you're having an event and they don't know when and where it's happening, you have failed, right? All right. So this is awful. And so you look here, now look what you got, right? You learn to dance, you know when and where it happens, and then you have all the different types of dance that you can learn from this place, right? This makes much more sense. All right, you're probably already using the principle of proximity in your work, but you may not be pushing as far as you could to make it truly effective, right? So really look at the pages, this element, to see which items should be grouped together, right? So look at this thing, right? So it kind of just, I mean, there's some use of proximity, but you're not sure what's supposed to go together and what's not, right? But here, the space is used much more consistently and on purpose to show you that these headlines, these bold and different colored text, goes with the text that's right under it, right? If you look at the one above it, it's kind of like they're just kind of interspersed between there. Do they really have anything to do with the thing that comes under it? You don't know, right? All right. So this looks a lot better. They've used proximity to imply a connection between these headlines and the text underneath. All right. Again, this is an unbelievably boring menu. I don't know how you'd find what you wanted to eat from this menu, right? It would be really a painful process to get that done, right? And so then we look down here, and again, he uses contrast and proximity to separate items so that the diner can more quickly find what they want to eat, right? And here again, he's made even one more tweak, moving the starters, the actual body of the starters, indenting it from the left, and the entrees doing the same thing. Again, proximity being used even more effectively here, right? And here he's using other elements to even further help define the page. As he's saying, rarely is principle of proximity the only answer to a page, right? And that's why there's 4 pieces of crap, right? And he throws the others in here just to show you that proximity isn't the only tool in the toolbox. And here's talking about our web page. We've been talking about pieces of paper, but all the concepts of graphic design work no matter what medium you're in, right? So that's why I'm doing this, because you're going to be working in a graphic medium, electronic graphic medium, and all the principles are the same, right? So um, here is a website, and this is just, a hot mess as well, right? So I don't know what all this is up here, but it's muddled, as he says, right? And he fixes it here, right? Organizing things in with using proximity, right? All right, and that's the whole of proximity, which is good because we're almost out of time, right? So the summaries I usually do kind of read, but so when several items are in close proximity to each other, they become one visual unit rather than several separate units. Items relating to each other should be grouped together. Be conscious of where your eye is going. Where do you start looking? What path do you follow? Where do you end up? After you've read it, where does your eye go next? You should be able to follow a logical progression through the piece from a definite beginning to a definite end. The basic purpose of proximity is to organize, right? Put things together. If they belong together, they should be close. If not, they shouldn't be close together, right? As a byproduct of organizing the communication, you create a more appealing, more organized white space, right? How to get it. Squint your eyes slightly and count the number of visual elements on the page by counting the number of times your eye stops. If there are more than 3 to 5 items on the page, see which of the separate elements can be grouped together into closer proximity to become one visual unit. And he says that's not a hard and fast rule because it depends on the piece, but 3 to 5 is kind of a ballpark figure, right? What to avoid, and this is important. Don't stick things in the corners or in the middle just because the space is empty. Empty space is not necessarily your enemy, right? Avoid too many separate elements on a page. Avoid leaving equal amounts of white space between elements unless each group is part of a subset. Avoid even a split second of confusion over whether the headline, subhead, caption, graphic, etc. belongs with its related material. Create a relationship among elements with close proximity. Don't create relationships